In this video, we'll be taking a look at 5 college basketball games happening on January 15, 2026, and providing you with free team picks and total picks for each one of those games, so 10 picks in total. Welcome back to Cash Out Sports. Let's dive right into it. Oh, and don't forget to subscribe and to click the bell icon to get notified as soon as these videos get released, so that you have more time to plan out your bets as we provide these videos on a daily basis. I can guarantee that you'll have all the important information that you'll need on these 5 college basketball games after fully watching this video. One more thing before we start, if you would like to gain access to our best exclusive sports picks to take your journey to the next level, then check out our Patreon in the link down below, where we offer our best single picks, parlay picks, and much more. Now let's get started. New Mexico State versus Liberty. Liberty Arena is going to be loud, bright, and very unfriendly for anyone wearing maroon, and the odds makers are treating it like a near lock for the home side with that big number they hung on this matchup. You can almost picture it already, the home crowd packed in, the broadcast zooming in on fans with foam fingers, and the scroll at the bottom of the screen showing Liberty giving that high single-digit spread. On paper, it feels like a tough ask for a visitor, but this is where New Mexico State's personality actually matters more than their logo. They are not the cute underdog that just wants to keep it close for 20 minutes. They lean into a very physical, blue-collar style that does not really care what the gym looks like. Teams like that travel well. They are happy to turn a clean, pretty game into something that feels more like a tug of war, a lot of contact, a lot of bodies around the rim, and a lot of possessions that end with someone on the floor instead of a highlight reel. Honestly, if you have watched enough mid-major hoops on a Thursday night, you know that kind of game script shows up more often than the glossy blowouts the line suggests. New Mexico State brings value in all the little places that bettors love but casual viewers barely mention. They attack the paint rather than settling, which means whistles, which means trips to the stripe, and those free throws are golden when you are catching points. They chase their own misses, too, crashing the offensive glass so often that it feels like every empty trip has a second chapter. That is the kind of thing that quietly steals possessions away from a favorite. Liberty, for all the things they do well, is not built around pounding the boards. They are closer to a precision offense that prefers to make the first shot and run back on defense rather than scrap for every loose ball. When the road team constantly generates second chances and extra free throws, those extra cracks at the basket become insurance against a cold stretch or a rough whistle. On the other end, the gap between these defenses is not as dramatic as the spread hints. New Mexico State is close enough to Liberty in overall defensive efficiency that this does not profile as a complete mismatch, and their strength on the defensive glass helps cut off one of the easiest paths to a runaway home win. If you can finish possessions with rebounds instead of letting the favorite reset, you chop down the number of quick 6 or 8-point bursts that make the scoreboard look ugly for the dog. Add in the reality that this conference schedule is a travel grind, with long flights, short turnarounds, and all the classic mid-season landmines, and suddenly asking the home side to win by clear multiple possessions does not feel as automatic as that line makes it look. This still sets up as a spot where Liberty can show why they are so highly rated, while New Mexico State quietly turns this into the type of game where every late possession feels like it matters for the bettors. As our first pick for this matchup, the New Mexico State Aggies to cover the spread as underdogs is our full game side pick. Books have hung a total number in that low 140s range, which on the surface whispers defense and discipline more than track meet. You hear Liberty, you think structure, long possessions, the kind of offense that works the shot clock and waits for a clean look. At first glance, that sounds like an undergame. Here is the thing though, Liberty's offense is not boring, it is efficient. They shoot a great percentage, they use spacing and ball movement to create open threes, and when those shots go in, the scoreboard jumps in bunches instead of slow drips. New Mexico State, for their part, is not some rock fight team that is allergic to scoring. They are comfortable playing at a solid tempo, and they have that mix of driving, drawing contact, and putting pressure on the rim that tends to keep the points coming even when jumpers refuse to cooperate. If you have ever sweated an under while one team lives at the line, you know how quickly the mood changes when the clock stops and the score keeps climbing. Both attacks have the profile you want when you are looking for points rather than bricks. Liberty is living in that very efficient territory where you almost expect them to clear a point per possession without breaking a sweat. New Mexico State is not far behind, and their fondness for attacking, rebounding, and creating extra trips means the total number of shot attempts in this game can sneak past what that raw pace number might suggest. Think of it like a grocery bill. You start with a basic list, then you keep tossing little add-ons into the cart, an extra possession here, a couple more free throws there, and by the time you get to the register, the total is higher than you expected. There is also a subtle story in how New Mexico State's schedule has treated bettors. They have leaned toward higher scoring outcomes, especially in spots where they are pushed or chasing, because the game naturally stretches out. Trailing teams foul, pressing teams create quick buckets on both sides, and what looked like a sensible under through 35 minutes can turn into a wild finish full of free throws and hurried threes. This matchup has the ingredients for that sort of script: a sharply efficient favorite, a stubborn underdog willing to keep attacking, and enough physical play to generate whistles. So while the number might look a bit high to anyone still thinking of Liberty as a grinded-out team, the blend of efficiency, free throws, and second chance looks gives this total plenty of paths to land higher than that projection suggests. As our second pick for this matchup, over the projected total is our full game total pick. Oakland versus Milwaukee. Oakland walks into this matchup as that short road favorite everyone circles on the board, the kind of number around a single possession that makes you lean forward a little in your chair. They are sitting right around a 9-9 overall record with a 5-2 mark in league play, but that straight record really does not tell the full story of what they have been through. They have already taken their swings at heavyweights on the road and survived, which is not glamorous in the box score, but it matters when you drop back into Horizon gyms that feel a lot smaller and a lot louder. That kind of schedule turns just another conference game into something that feels manageable, almost familiar, instead of a big scary spotlight moment. Milwaukee comes in more like that talented neighbor that throws great parties but sometimes forgets to lock the front door. Their style still leans toward pace, space, and a lot of runouts, which is fun, but it can also turn their home floor into a coin flip if the game tilts toward chaos instead of control. They are hovering around 8-10 overall with a 4-3 league record, a profile that screams dangerous but inconsistent, especially when the tempo picks up. You can feel it when they go on one of those 3-minute binges at home. The building wakes up, the band gets louder, and suddenly you are down 8 and wondering what just happened. Here is the thing, Oakland is actually comfortable in that kind of storm. Their core group, with Brody Robinson handling things on the perimeter alongside Isaiah Garrett, Tubiru Naivalura, Michael Hooge, and Ziara Wells, has been on the floor together and available, and that continuity shows in how they handle late possessions. Nothing is guaranteed, of course, but having your main rotation healthy and in rhythm deep into January is a quiet edge that does not show up in a headline. On the other side, Milwaukee has had to live with a major long-term absence in John Lovelace Jr., who is not part of this season's on-court picture, and that changes how their wings and forwards fit together. Seth Hubbard is the one cloud in the sky because he has missed time since December and his exact status for this date is not completely nailed down in public info, but the larger picture for the spread is the same. Milwaukee still leans on players like Amar Aguilar, Isaiah Dorcas, and Faison Fields to carry a lot of responsibility, while questions around Hubbard or a player like Sekou Kane add a bit of uncertainty without flipping the matchup on its head. Honestly, that is the sort of thing bettors argue about in group chats all day, but in a single game script like this, it usually nudges the total touches and usage more than it rewrites the whole identity of the team. If you pull back and look at how the market has treated these two so far, Oakland has quietly been kinder to tickets than Milwaukee. The Golden Grizzlies have a winning record against the number, around 10-7, and have been serviceable when asked to lay points. Milwaukee sits closer to 7-10 against the spread, which hints that their volatility has not been especially friendly to anyone trusting them with their money. It is not a perfect science, but it does tell you that one team tends to meet or beat expectations while the other tends to wander a bit. So when you combine Oakland's heavier schedule, their healthier and more settled core, and their track record in these kinds of up-tempo league games, you get a picture of a group that is used to holding its nerve on the road. Milwaukee will absolutely have runs, and there will almost certainly be a stretch where the Panthers make it feel like the roof might come off. But the question is who is more likely to string together enough solid possessions in the last 4 minutes. Here, the more seasoned and battle-tested side looks a little more trustworthy to finish the job by more than just a single bucket, even if it takes a few heart rate spikes to get there. As our first pick for this matchup, the Oakland Golden Grizzlies to cover the spread as favorites is our full game side pick. Books hanging the total number around the mid-160s are basically saying, go on then, see if you really want to sweat every possession. If you glance at the raw scoring, it lines up with that story pretty well. Oakland scores in the mid-80s on average and gives up almost the same, which puts their typical final scores right around the high 160s. Milwaukee lives closer to the high 70s on offense and just under 80 allowed, which lands their usual totals in the high 150s. Add those personalities together and you end up right in the neighborhood of that posted number. But the way these teams get there is what makes this interesting. Oakland has no interest in a slow dance. They shoot early, they shoot often, and they accept that a few questionable decisions come with the freedom that produces those big scoring nights. Their defense, if we are being honest, behaves more like a suggestion than a rule at times, which is why their opponents keep putting up gaudy numbers too. That trading of buckets, possession after possession, is exactly the kind of thing that turns a high total from scary to realistic. Milwaukee is not trying to turn this into a bruising, half-court chess match either. Last season they were kings of the fast break, and that mindset has carried into this campaign, even if the exact numbers change. You still see them try to turn defensive rebounds into immediate pressure, pushing the ball and hunting early looks. The downside is that when the Panthers play that fast, their own defense bends and sometimes breaks, which again is great for people holding an over ticket, not as great for anyone who enjoys clean help side rotations. Trend-wise, Oakland games have been leaning toward the high side pretty often. Their schedule is littered with totals that sailed past the number, especially when they are the ones expected to win, which says their style is not just high scoring in theory, it is high scoring in practice. Milwaukee sits closer to even on the over and under count, but with plenty of recent games where the total ended up in that same high-scoring neighborhood. In other words, when things open up, they really open up. There is also the stage itself. An arena that feels big, bright, and a little theatrical, plus a game that features two offenses that like to show off, is not exactly the setting where you expect either coach to slam on the brakes. On a nationally visible night, nobody wants to turn this into a grind, and both programs recruit to an identity that sells pace and freedom. That kind of built-in philosophy does not just flip off like a light for one random evening in January. The one piece of real uncertainty for the total is again Seth Hubbard and his health. If he sits, Milwaukee loses one of its more dangerous scoring options, but that has already been part of their recent reality. The Panthers have had to find other ways to fill those points, and Oakland's willingness to play a loose, high-possession game gives opposing guards and wings plenty of chances to step into that space. So his unclear status matters, but it does not completely undermine the idea of a track meet. Put all of that together and you end up with a projected shape of the game that looks a lot like those mid-80s versus low-80s kind of scores people toss around when they talk about fun Horizon League nights. The risk for anyone taking a stance on such a high number is not that these teams cannot score, it is that one side suddenly forgets how, or that foul trouble and weird rotations drag things into a slog. Given what both teams have shown this season though, their habits still point to a fast tempo, quick shots, and plenty of chances for both sets of guards and forwards to see the ball go through the net. As our second pick for this matchup, over the projected total is our full game total pick. Charleston versus Towson. You have one team rolling into this matchup feeling like the fun side of college hoops, and another that looks pretty average in the box scores but is a lot meaner than its record suggests. On one side, Charleston shows up with a 7-game win streak, an 11-6 overall mark, and a perfect 4-0 start in league play, which always catches the eye of casual bettors scrolling through their apps. On the other side, Towson sits at 9-9 and 1-4 in conference, which sounds boring on paper, but the market still hangs them as a small home favorite, and that already tells you the books respect what they are underneath the surface. Here is the thing. Towson plays like a cinder block in sneakers. They are bigger on the glass, they hold their line defensively, and they do not panic when possessions get ugly, they almost invite the grind. Those non-conference battles against national powers were not about highlight plays, they were about proving they could drag high-level offenses into long, uncomfortable trips in the half-court, and that kind of experience usually matters more in January than whatever the early win-loss line says. Charleston, for all the good vibes, has been living on a pretty thin scoring margin most nights, and that kind of edge can flip fast once you hit tough road environments. They play with confidence, sure, but a lot of those wins have come from outlasting teams rather than truly separating, and that matters when you walk into a gym where the home side is desperate to fix a 1-4 league start. Towson feels more like the team built to handle 40 minutes of bumping, boxing out, and playing through contact without losing their identity, which is often what separates a narrow favorite that squeaks by from one that actually rewards people who trusted them against the spread. As our first pick for this matchup, the Towson Tigers to cover the spread as favorites is our full game side pick. Charleston's recent games read like classic shootout material, with scores that keep creeping into the mid-150s and beyond, and that naturally gives people the sense that any contest they touch is going to turn into a track meet. They enjoy pace, they like freedom, and they are not shy about trading buckets if that is what the night calls for, which is fun to watch and, honestly, pretty stressful if you have the under and you are watching on delay. Towson lives on the other side of that experience, and you can feel it just from glancing at their results. When they get their way, games slow down, possessions stretch, and both teams have to work for every decent look, and that tends to pull totals into a more modest range. Those low-scoring grinders from earlier in the year were not accidents. They were a reflection of how they are comfortable playing and how often they can steer the tempo towards something heavier and more physical. So when you set Charleston's tendency toward open, free-flowing offense against Towson's comfort with mud wrestling in the half-court, you do not really get a clean run and gun script. You get a tug of war where clean looks are harder to find than people expect from Charleston's reputation alone. With a projected number sitting in the low 140s, it only takes a few long, empty trips, a handful of late clock possessions, and a stretch where the whistle tightens up for the score to land in a range that feels more like a defensive win than a shooting exhibition, even if both teams still have their moments. As our second pick for this matchup, under the projected total is our full game total pick. Wichita State versus Florida Atlantic. Let us set the scene in Boca Raton because this one feels more like a television show than a midweek conference game. Wichita State flies in off a little emotional roller coaster, that wild double overtime loss at Charlotte baked into their legs, then a sharp response at home where they closed out North Texas behind a flamethrower performance from their lead guard. Florida Atlantic, on the other hand, is sleeping in its own beds, staying in its routine, and riding the buzz of that national television win over Memphis, where the Owls basically turned the lane into a blocked shot museum and owned the glass. When you get that kind of emotional momentum at home, in a tight arena that actually feels loud on television, it usually translates into a team that plays a little faster, a little tougher, and, honestly, a little more confident in every 50-50 loose ball. Here is the thing that really tilts this matchup under the hood. Wichita State is built like a junkyard dog on the offensive glass, one of the very best in the country at creating extra chances from misses, and that is not an accident. The Shockers send bodies to the rim like it is a team rule carved into the locker room wall. But now they are doing it without a key rotation big who went down with a season-ending Achilles injury and a couple of other guards whose seasons have basically been shut down. So the front court and the depth chart are not quite as thick as the raw rebounding numbers suggest. Against most teams, you can still get away with that, but Florida Atlantic just showed against Memphis that if you try to bully them on the boards, they will happily treat it like a personal challenge, hammering out a 46-29 rebounding edge and racking up a shot-blocking total that looked like something from a video game. Now fold in the form guide. Wichita State has been living on a knife edge, with almost all of its losses coming by only a handful of points, and that is usually the calling card of a gritty team that will not go away. They just came through a stretch where they erased a big road deficit at UAB, then coughed up a huge lead at Charlotte, then leaned on their hot hand to finish off North Texas, which tells you this group is tough, dangerous, and not at all scared of the moment. But it also tells you they are spending a lot of emotional energy just to stay on the right side of these margins, and now they walk into a building where Florida Atlantic has been very comfortable, stacking wins and feeding off that new American Conference spotlight. Florida Atlantic's profile is different. They are not trying to win beauty contests. They are trying to punch holes in your paint, live at the rim, and make you feel every defensive possession with a rim protector who erases mistakes behind the perimeter. That style tends to travel, but it really shines at home where officials, crowd noise, and energy all lean toward the aggressor. And when you stack that against a Shocker team that is short on full-strength bodies compared with how the roster looked on paper in the fall, plus the travel, plus the fact that Florida Atlantic is the group fresh off proving it can handle a high-profile opponent under bright lights, it nudges the expected margin toward the Owls rather than the visitors. So if you are just asking who is more likely to separate late and actually land on the right side of this spread number, the matchup hints at the home side having slightly more ways to get there. As our first pick for this matchup, the Florida Atlantic Owls to cover the spread as favorites is our full game side pick. These are not plodding, grinded-out offenses. Both teams are perfectly happy playing in the high 70s and 80s, and the underlying numbers back that up, with Wichita State living right around the high 70s per night and Florida Atlantic sitting in the low 80s, which already puts you flirting with a total in the 160 neighborhood before you even adjust for pace and situation. When both sides naturally live in that scoring zip code, you do not need a track meet to get over a mid-150s number. You just need the game to avoid turning into a whistle fest of missed jumpers and empty trips. Here is where Wichita State's personality quietly does the heavy lifting for an over. The Shockers crash the offensive glass like it is the last plate at a buffet, ranking near the top of the nation in both offensive rebounds per game and offensive rebounding percentage, which is just a fancy way of saying more shots, more putbacks, more chances for points on each trip. Extra possessions are the enemy of an under because even an average shooting night suddenly comes with bonus attempts at the rim. And you can see that play out in some of their recent box scores where a game that looks normal for 3 halves of basketball suddenly explodes in the last 20 minutes once legs get heavy and defenses lose focus. Florida Atlantic brings its own gasoline for the fire. In that Memphis win, the Owls did not turn it into some slow, grim rock fight. They used an explosive second half, pressure at the rim, and second chance scoring to push that game to 167 combined points while still leaving a handful of open looks on the table. That is not a one-off. This season they have been one of the more free-scoring groups in Division I, sitting in the low 80s per game and comfortable playing in games where both teams get to their average, which is exactly how overs sneak through without you even noticing until you look up and realize both sides are already in the 70s. Let me explain how those styles fit together. Wichita State wants to shoot with confidence from deep, then send multiple bodies to the rim if the shot misses, which lengthens possessions and often leads to kick-out threes or quick putbacks. Florida Atlantic, with its shot blocking and rim protection, will absolutely swat a few of those away, but that kind of aggressive help defense often leaves corners open and can lead to foul trouble, and foul trouble late in games is like free candy for an over because it turns the final 2 minutes into a parade of free throws and stopped clocks. If we get the game script that both coaches probably expect, something like Wichita State refusing to go away, hitting big shots, and forcing Florida Atlantic to keep the pedal down rather than dribbling out the clock, that is where the total can climb from merely on pace to suddenly both teams are in the 80s and we are sweating every whistle. The betting market seems to agree this is more likely a high-scoring environment than a slog. Books open this total in the low 150s and early action has leaned upward, which usually tells you that the sharper side of the market sees the same combination we just walked through: efficient offense, extra possessions on the glass, recent game flow pointing toward big numbers, and a foul game at the end that could easily add 6 to 10 bonus points in the final minute alone. So if you are just trying to predict whether this turns into a slow half-court stare-down or a game where both teams get multiple cracks at 80, the way these two are playing right now pulls the expectation toward a more generous total on the scoreboard. As our second pick for this matchup, over the projected total is our full game total pick. Gonzaga versus Washington State. Pullman is going to feel loud for this one, no matter what the spread says the gap is supposed to be between these two teams. You have a top 10 Gonzaga group walking into Beasley Coliseum on a Thursday night, sitting at 17-1 overall and 5-0 in the West Coast Conference, laying something like 18 points on the road against an 8-10 Washington State team that most casual fans still think of as a scrappy rebuild. On paper that sounds like a mismatch, but spread bettors are not paid for who wins the handshake line. They are paid for how close the underdog can keep it when the final horn hits. Here is the thing. Gonzaga has been brilliant straight up, but the market has caught on and started to tax them hard. They have covered only about 10 of 18 against the number this season, and trend pieces all over the odds sites keep repeating the same thing. They are 2-5 against the spread in their last 7 and only 1-8 against the spread in their last 9 clashes with Washington State. Even when Gonzaga wins this regional matchup, and they usually do, history says the Cougars keep it a lot tighter than the closing line. In Pullman, that gap has been even more stubborn, with Gonzaga listed as just 2-9 against the spread in their last 11 trips into Beasley. Washington State's current record does not scream live underdog at first glance, but the recent form tells a more competitive story. They have just come through a stretch of league games where they went toe-to-toe with Loyola Marymount on the road, handled Oregon State by double digits, edged out Loyola Marymount at home, slugged through a rock fight at Seattle U, and won a grinder at Portland, often playing inside spreads in the single digits and as a double-digit dog that hung around against St. Mary's. That is the kind of schedule that quietly hardens a roster, especially one that leans on 10-plus guys every night and lets different lineups punch above their weight for a few minutes at a time. The Cougars' biggest strength here is not a single star, it is that deep rotation and the way they lean into it. Their own game notes love to brag about the bench, talking about nights with 60-plus bench points and a season average in the high 20s off the pine, and that shows up on film as wave after wave of fresh bodies. You can see it when a group led by someone like Emmanuel Ugbo or Ace Glass checks in and suddenly the energy picks up, the closeouts get sharper, and those extra effort plays that do not show up in the box score start to pile up. Against a favorite that wants to stretch the floor and run, having 10 or 11 guys you trust is not a luxury, it is how you survive the middle of each half without getting buried by a 14-0 run. On the other side, Gonzaga's style is still very scoreboard friendly, but it can also be cover unfriendly when the number gets inflated. They love to come out of the gates fast, play through their star bigs, share the ball, and then, once they are up 15 or 20, you occasionally see them shift into a more controlled, professional finish. That is perfect for winning, and not always perfect for clearing an 18-point spread on the road. You have already seen them win by comfortable margins and still fail to cover in spots like San Diego, at Pepperdine, or against Seattle U, where late lineups and a small dip in urgency turned blowouts into wins that were still disappointing for anyone holding a big favorite ticket. Washington State's home building also matters more than people admit. Beasley is not one of those shiny arenas with a corporate feel. It is loud, weird, and a little claustrophobic when the students show up, and rivalry games bring out every former student who still has an old hoodie in the closet. Gonzaga has had some rough cover nights in Pullman over the years, even in seasons where they were clearly the better side. A packed house, a national television slot, and a highly ranked team across from you can keep a medium talent roster playing at a high energy level all night. That extra effort often shows up as one or two last defensive stands in the final minutes that shave the margin from 20 to 14 and quietly flip tickets. There is also the emotional angle for Washington State, which you cannot really measure but you can feel. They know Gonzaga is a brand name, they know recruits watch this game, and they know this is one of their best chances all year to throw a wrench into the national narrative. They are not being asked to win outright, they are being asked to keep the thing within shouting distance at home, and their recent track record in league play says they are getting better at that exact task. If they can avoid the early knockout punch and keep the first 10 minutes within single digits, all the pressure shifts to the favorite carrying the giant number. Put that all together, and you get a game script where Gonzaga can still look like the better team for long stretches, but Washington State has enough depth, enough home court juice, and enough history against this spread to make every late possession matter for the number, even if the winner is not really in doubt by then. As our first pick for this matchup, the Washington State to cover the spread as underdogs is our full game side pick. Books are signaling that they expect something closer to a track meet than a grind, and honestly, that makes sense at first glance when you see Gonzaga scoring over 90 per night and Washington State sitting in the mid-70s with a small negative margin. It is very easy to picture this as one of those classic television games where the score bug is updating every possession and nobody can string more than two stops together. But here is where it gets more interesting. Gonzaga's scoring profile is explosive, no question, yet a lot of their recent box scores show a rhythm that is less 40 minutes of chaos and more 2 or 3 violent runs wrapped in a pretty controlled game. They have had total slip under in games where they still cleared 80 points themselves, simply because they turned the screws defensively and did not let the opponent keep pace. They have also gone under sizable numbers in games where they were huge favorites, because once the lead was built, they were happy to trade longer, lower possession stretches for style points. Washington State, meanwhile, sits at that interesting middle ground where they score enough to threaten you, but they are not naturally built for a pure shootout. Their season averages are in the mid-70s for scoring and just under 76 allowed, with solid but not absurd shooting splits from the field and from three. They can absolutely catch fire for a half, and you have seen them pour it in during tournament settings or against the right opponent, but there are also stretches where their half-court sets slow down, their spacing shrinks a bit, and they get stuck in those 2 or 3 minute scoring droughts that keep a total in check. Let me explain why that matters so much here. When a heavy favorite runs into an underdog that has real bench depth and just enough offense, the game often bends toward a kind of controlled chaos rather than a full sprint. Gonzaga does not actually need this to become a 100 to 80 type of night to feel good about themselves. They just need to build and protect a reasonable cushion, especially coming off a stretch where they already had to burn a lot of energy in league play. Washington State, trying to survive physically and emotionally, is going to be happy to squeeze possessions, work late into the shot clock, and make every Gonzaga trip finish in the half court instead of transition. The defensive side of the ball supports a more measured scoring output too. Gonzaga's advanced metrics this season have them near the top of the country not only in offense but also in adjusted defensive efficiency, and their recent wins over teams like Loyola Marymount and Pepperdine show them holding opponents to the 40s or 50s while still getting their own numbers. They are long on the wings, strong inside, and very comfortable switching between different pick-and-roll coverages, which tends to shave the easy points from a game and force an opponent like Washington State to rely on tougher jumpers late in the clock. When you combine that with Washington State's occasional cold spells, you start to see more games that live in the high 60s or low 70s for the Cougars, not in the 80s. Washington State's bench, as fun as it is for side bettors, is a double-edged sword for a high total. Rolling out 10 or 11 players can help you keep energy high on defense, but it can also lead to lineups that are not packed with shot creation, especially with a key guard like Thomas Thrasterson sidelined by a left foot stress fracture. Those units can defend and rebound, but they might also produce some choppy offensive stretches, missed threes, and long possessions that grind seconds off the clock without adding much to the scoreboard. Great for keeping the spread tight. Less great if you are asking both teams to fly past 150 points. Game script matters a lot for the total as well. If Gonzaga does what the market expects and builds a solid lead in the middle of the second half, you could see a slow drift into let us just get out of here healthy mode from both sides. That usually means fewer early clock threes, more methodical half-court trips, and coaches using the back end of the rotation for experience instead of hunting extra points. Those final 4 minutes in a near-decided game can feel like an eternity to anyone holding an over ticket, especially with a big number. On the flip side, if Washington State does keep things closer, that usually implies the defenses are doing their jobs. For the Cougars to keep Gonzaga from running away, they have to limit live ball turnovers, sprint back on every miss, and force the Bulldogs to win in the half court. Winning that way is absolutely still within Gonzaga's comfort zone, but it often looks like strong, patient offense into quality shots rather than a repeated barrage of quick possessions. That style can still get you into the 80s, but it makes it much harder for both teams together to sail past a total sitting in the mid-150s. When you step back and put it all together, the ingredients here look more like a game where Gonzaga's quality shows, Washington State competes, the defenses quietly win more possessions than the box score narrative will admit, and the final combined score lands below the kind of fireworks number the market has posted. As our second pick for this matchup, under the projected total is our full game total pick. That's all for now, so if you have any other games you would like reviewed, then leave a comment down below with the game you would like analyzed, subscribe to our channel, leave a like on this video, and we'll get to it as soon as we possibly can. We would also love to hear your opinion on the picks presented to you in this video, whether you agree or disagree with them, so leave a comment down below and do let us know.